My name is Paula Nunez. I'm 27 years old, and I'm a first lieutenant in the United States Army Special Forces. After 9 months in a place where gunfire was the daily soundtrack, all I wanted was to hear the familiar squeak and snap of the screen door of my home in Concord closing behind me. But instead, I heard my mother's voice, as cold as the ice on the Charles River in January. From this day on, you are a stranger to us. Do not come back. My father stood right behind her, silent, his arms crossed like a sentinel guarding her cruel decision. A laugh escaped my lips, a broken, trembling sound. A stranger? I'm your daughter. But the heavy oak door slammed shut before the words could ever leave my mouth. The deadbolt clicked into place as final as a gunshot. Abandoned on the manicured lawn of my own family home, they had no idea just how dangerous the stranger they had just created could be. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe if you've ever felt like a stranger in your own home. This story is about how a disavowed soldier used her skills to take back command. The click of the deadbolt echoed in the sudden silence of the suburban street. For a few seconds, I didn't move. I couldn't. My duffel bag, heavy with 9 months of my life packed into canvas, suddenly felt like it was filled with lead, pulling me down into the perfectly cut grass. A high-pitched ringing started in my ears, a familiar phantom from my time overseas. But this time, it was louder than the quiet rustle of the autumn leaves. It was the sound of absolute severance. My mind, trained to assess and react, was frozen. I half expected the door to swing open again, to see my mother's face crack into a smile and hear her say, "Just kidding, welcome home." It wasn't a joke. The polished brass knocker stared back at me, indifferent. I looked up, my eyes finding the window to my old bedroom on the second floor. I could almost see them through the glass, the faint, green glow in the dark stars I'd stuck to my ceiling when I was 8 years old, a tiny galaxy that had watched over me for my entire life. Now, the whole house, the place that held every scraped knee, every Christmas morning, every late-night conversation, felt as alien and hostile as an enemy outpost. The mission objective had suddenly changed from return home to survive this. Taking a shaky step back, my heels sinking into the soft lawn, I turned toward my old pickup truck parked at the curb. That's when I saw the sleek black BMW turn into the driveway. My brother, Daniel. He slowed to a stop, the passenger window gliding down with a soft hum. "Oh, hey, you're back," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of any warmth or surprise. His eyes never left the bright screen of his phone. "What's up?" A desperate surge of hope shot through me. He was my brother. He would explain. He would be my ally. "Mom and Dad, they just threw me out, Daniel." He finally glanced up from his phone, his expression a mixture of mild annoyance and boredom. He shrugged, a gesture so casual it felt like a physical blow. "You must have done something then." He put the car in gear. "Anyway, I'm heading inside. It's getting cold." I watched, speechless, as he pulled into the garage. The automatic door began its slow, grinding descent, a gray metal curtain closing on the final act of my belonging. It shut with a dull thud, a second door slamming in my face within 5 minutes, extinguishing the last flicker of hope inside me. The casual cruelty of my parents was a clean wound, a quick, sharp cut. But Daniel's indifference, that was a festering poison. It hurt more. I finally made it to my truck, the familiar scent of old coffee and worn upholstery a strange comfort in a world that had just been turned upside down. I sank into the driver's seat, the cold vinyl sticking to my skin. The air inside felt thick, heavy, hard to breathe. My training, my instinct, screamed at me to find support, to establish a line of communication. My hands, acting on their own, found my phone. I scrolled through the contacts, my thumb hovering over one name, Sarah. My best friend since middle school. The only person outside these walls who knew the cracks in the perfect Nunez family portrait. I pressed call. It rang twice before she picked up. "Paula?" Her voice was hesitant, strained, not the warm, excited greeting I had expected. "Sarah, hey." I started, my own voice cracking. I'm back, but something terrible just happened. There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear the faint sound of a television in the background. Paula, look, your mom just called my mom. Another pause. The silence stretched, filled with everything she wasn't saying. I think it's best if we don't talk for a while. I'm really sorry. Before I could form a word, a question, a plea, she hung up. I stared at the black screen of my phone. The call ended. I didn't say anything. I just lowered the phone to my lap. And in that cold, silent truck, the strategic part of my brain took over, pushing the raw, screaming pain into a locked box. This wasn't a random family dispute. This was a coordinated action. My mother hadn't just shut the door. She had immediately started cutting my supply lines, neutralizing my support network. They hadn't just expelled me. They were executing an isolation campaign. And I was completely, utterly alone. I started the engine, the old truck rumbling to life like a loyal, aging animal. I drove with no destination, the familiar streets of Concord blurring past my window. I passed the Old North Bridge, the place where the first shots of the American Revolution were fired, a battle for freedom. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. Here I was, a soldier who had sworn to defend that freedom, now a prisoner of a war I never knew had been declared. My headlights illuminated the town's welcome sign, a quaint, colonial-style marker that read, Concord, birthplace of American liberty. I pulled over, killing the engine. I remembered standing near this very spot on the day I got my acceptance letter to West Point. My father had been beaming, his chest puffed out with pride. He'd put a firm, heavy hand on my shoulder, his voice thick with emotion. You are the honor of this family, Paula, he'd said. Always remember that. That promise, that declaration, now echoed in the emptiness of the truck as the most painful lie I'd ever been told. What happened to that honor? It had been discarded without reason, without trial. It was then I understood. The discipline, the integrity, the code of honor that West Point had hammered into my very bones. Those were foreign concepts in the house I'd just left. They hadn't thrown out a daughter. They had thrown out a symbol they no longer wanted, a living reminder of a standard they themselves could not meet. This wasn't a rejection. It was an abdication of everything they claimed to be. And in their cowardice, they had just left a trained soldier outside their gates with nothing left to defend and nothing left to lose. Sitting in the cold cab of my truck, parked under the mocking welcome sign of my own hometown, I realized the truth. This feeling of being an outsider wasn't new. The expulsion order was just the first time the verdict had been read aloud. Before tonight, the dismissals were quieter, woven into the fabric of my childhood. As minutes ticked by, the past began to unspool, not as random memories, but as coordinates on a map of injustice they had drawn for me long ago. The first point on that map was plotted my senior year of high school. I remembered the exact feeling of the thick, expensive paper in my hands. It was an acceptance letter from a prestigious university on the West Coast, offering a full athletic scholarship for track. It was my dream. Sunshine, a top-tier program, a chance to really test my limits. I ran into the house, my heart hammering with joy, waving the letter like a winning ticket. My mother was in the kitchen, arranging flowers. I laid the letter on the granite countertop. Mom, look, I got it. A full ride. She glanced at it, her eyes scanning the letterhead before a small frown touched her lips. California, she said, turning back to the flowers. That's so far away, Paula. Who will look after Daniel when your father and I travel? Your brother needs you. My father walked in then. He picked up the letter, read it, and placed it back down with an air of finality. He looked at me with that familiar, disappointed expression. Family comes first, Paula, he said, his voice gentle but firm. A good school closer to home is more than enough. Family comes first. It was their favorite weapon, the one they used to disguise selfishness as virtue. So I complied. I wrote a polite refusal to my dream school, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. I enrolled in a state college a 45-minute drive away, close enough to come home every weekend to look after Daniel. He never once said thank you. I had sacrificed my future for his comfort, and he hadn't even noticed. A wave of resentment, old and familiar, washed over me. It tasted like the greasy air of the local diner where I'd spent the entire summer before I turned 17. I'd worked double shifts, my feet aching and my clothes smelling of fried food, all to save up for my first vehicle. It wasn't much, a beat-up old pickup truck, but it was mine. It was $3,000 of my own sweat. It was the symbol of my independence, my first taste of freedom. Then came Daniel's 16th birthday. I woke up to find my parents waiting for me. My mother was holding my truck keys. "Just for a little while, sweetie," she said with a placating smile. "Just until we can get him a new car. You understand?" I didn't understand, but my protests were silenced. Temporary stretched into an entire school year. I took the bus every morning, watching from the window as my brother drove my truck, the one I'd paid for, to go hang out with his friends. The one time I complained after finding muddy footprints on the dashboard, my father's voice cut through the air. "Don't be so selfish, Paula. It's just a truck." Selfish. That was their word for me whenever I dared to want something for myself. I learned to stop wanting things, at least out loud. The memory shifted to the day I announced my decision to apply to West Point. The opposition was immediate. "The military? That's no place for a Nunez girl," my mother scoffed. They fought me on it for weeks. But then, something changed. They must have realized the prestige, the connections that came with a daughter at the United States Military Academy. Suddenly, their narrative changed. My father sat me down in his study, a proud gleam in his eye. "Go, Pauli," he said, his voice full of sincerity. "Prove yourself. When you come back, a decorated officer, there will be a significant position waiting for you at the family company. You'll have earned it." That promise became my fuel. It pushed me through grueling marches and sleepless nights at the academy. The thought of returning not just as a daughter, but as a respected partner, an equal. It was a powerful motivator. Now, sitting in the dark, I saw the promise for what it was. A strategic maneuver. A way to control me from a distance, a carrot dangled just out of reach. It was never about my success. It was about how my success could serve them. Finally, the most painful memory surfaced. It wasn't a single event, but 100 of them, all blending into one long, silent dinner. The scene was always the same. Daniel would talk about some minor achievement at his cushy job at my father's company. My parents would hang on his every word, their faces lit with adoration. Then I would try to share something from my world. I'd talk about a complex tactical exercise or the responsibility of leading my peers. My mother would wave her hand dismissively. "Oh, Paula, please, not at the dinner table. It's so unpleasant." My father would simply retreat behind his newspaper, so I learned to be silent. I learned to edit my life down to a few bland sentences. I realized they weren't interested in my world. They were only interested in whether I could fit neatly into theirs. And the answer was always no. I was a puzzle piece from a different box, and they were tired of trying to force me into a space I was never designed to fill. Each memory was a fresh cut, layering over the wound of tonight. This wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was a slow, systematic erosion of my worth. They had taken my dream. They had taken my truck. They had taken my voice. They had taken my past, piece by piece. Staring out at the quiet, sleeping houses of Concord, a cold resolve settled in my bones. I wouldn't let them take my future. My future began with a one-room studio in Lowell. With the few $1,000s I had in savings, I found a small, empty apartment in a working-class neighborhood miles away from the manicured lawns and historic charm of Concord. There was no welcoming committee. My only furniture was my military-issue duffel bag, which I dropped with a thud in the center of the room. The sound echoed off the bare walls. That first night, I didn't even have a mattress. I spread my service blanket over the cold, hard wood floor. The chill seeped right through the thin wool, creeping into my bones. I lay on my back, staring up at a ceiling webbed with hairline cracks, a stark contrast to the perfect, glowing galaxy of my childhood bedroom. This was it. This was my new forward operating base. No support, no supply lines. The mission was simple, but it was also the hardest one I'd ever been given. Survive. The reality of my situation hit me with the first month's rent. My lieutenant's pay, which felt substantial overseas, was barely enough to keep my head above water in the notoriously expensive state of Massachusetts. I needed a second job. My military background made me an easy hire for a night security gig at a massive distribution warehouse on the edge of town. The work was mind-numbingly dull and profoundly lonely. For 8 hours a night, I walked. I patrolled endless aisles of towering metal shelves stacked high with cardboard boxes, my world reduced to concrete floors and the hum of fluorescent lights. The only sound breaking the oppressive silence was the rhythmic squeak of my own boots. Sometimes I'd scroll through my phone during a break, a habit I instantly regretted. I'd see pictures of my old high school friends posting about their new homes, their trips to Europe, their baby announcements. I was sleeping on the floor and eating canned soup, a ghost haunting a warehouse while the world I once knew moved on without me. One night, around 3 a.m., I rounded a corner and saw a group of warehouse workers on their break, gathered under a dim light. They were laughing, sharing sandwiches wrapped in wax paper and passing around a bag of chips. The easy camaraderie, the simple human connection, hit me with an unexpected force. One of them, a heavy-set man with a kind smile, noticed me hovering in the shadows. "Hey, security, you want a sandwich?" "My wife makes the best roast beef," he offered, holding one out. A lump formed in my throat. I wanted to say yes more than anything. I wanted to sit with them, to laugh at a stupid joke, to feel like a part of something, even for just 10 minutes. But I was on duty. I was separate. "Thanks, but I can't," I said, my voice sounding more formal than I intended. "Appreciate the offer." I gave a curt nod and continued my patrol, the sound of their laughter following me down the aisle. The ache of loneliness was a physical pang in my chest, a hunger for something a simple sandwich couldn't fix. The breaking point came on a cold, damp morning a few weeks later. My shift had ended, my body screaming for sleep. I got into my truck, turned the key in the ignition, and was met with a sickening click, 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 followed by silence. I tried again. Nothing. The battery was dead. I slumped over the steering wheel, the exhaustion of the past weeks crashing down on me all at once. It wasn't just the truck, it was everything. The empty apartment, the lonely nights, the feeling of being completely adrift. And for the first time since that day on my parents' lawn, I cried. Hot, silent tears of pure, unadulterated frustration and despair streamed down my face. A sharp rap on the driver's side window made me jump. I looked up to see an older man with white hair and grease-stained hands peering in at me. He lived in the apartment across from mine. I'd seen him tinkering with cars in the parking lot. He gestured for me to roll down the window. He didn't say much. He just looked at my tear-streaked face, then at the hood of the truck. "Pop the hood," was all he said, his voice a gravelly New England accent. Without another word, he got to work. He had his own tools, his own know-how. An hour later, after cleaning the corroded terminals and giving me a jump start, the engine roared to life. I fumbled for my wallet, pulling out the few bills I had. "Sir, how much do I owe you?" He just waved a dismissive hand, his eyes warm and crinkling at the corners. "Don't you worry about it. Consider it a thank you for your service, Lieutenant," he said, giving me a small, respectful nod. He didn't know my story. He didn't know I'd been thrown out, that I felt like a failure. He just saw the uniform I kept folded on my passenger seat and responded with kindness. That simple, unprompted act of generosity from a total stranger felt more real, more valuable than any hollow promise my family had ever made. It was a single spark in the darkness, and it was enough. That day, I decided I couldn't afford to fall apart. Despair was a luxury I didn't have, so I fell back on the only thing I knew, the only system that had never failed me: discipline. My life became a drill schedule. E500. Wake up, run 3 miles through the pre-dawn gloom of Lowell. 0600. Field strip my tiny apartment, cleaning my base to inspection-ready perfection. Meals were simple but nutritious. Eggs, chicken, rice, fuel, not comfort. In my downtime, I didn't watch TV. I read books on military history and strategy. The routine wasn't just a habit, it was my armor. It was the one thing in my chaotic world that I had absolute control over. It kept the crushing weight of my situation at bay, transforming each day from an endless expanse of loneliness into a series of achievable missions. Wake up, run, clean, work, survive. It was a small war, fought every single day, and I was determined not to lose. For weeks, my life had settled into a grueling rhythm, a monotonous loop of survival. Wake, run, clean, work, sleep. Repeat. My world had shrunk to the four walls of my studio and the cavernous aisles of the warehouse. Then, one afternoon, the rhythm broke. I'd just gotten back from my night shift, my body heavy with fatigue, and was about to fall into bed when my phone buzzed with a new email. I almost ignored it, but the subject line, in all caps, caught my eye. Urgent, regarding the Nunez family matter. The sender was a law firm I'd never heard of. Jacobs, Finch, and Associates. My first instinct, honed by years of their manipulation, was suspicion. This felt like a trap, another calculated move in their campaign. But my military training kicked in immediately, overriding the emotional response. Never dismiss intel without verification. There was a fundamental flaw in their approach, a contradiction that screamed at me from the screen. They had officially designated me a stranger. Strangers don't have urgent family matters. This inconsistency was a red flag, not a warning of danger to me, but a signal of a weakness in their defense. They needed something. For the first time, they were the ones reaching out. The predator was showing its soft underbelly. After a few hours of much-needed sleep, I sat at my small second-hand table, the phone feeling heavy in my hand. I took a deep breath, cleared my throat, and dialed the number. A smooth, professional voice answered on the second ring. Mr. Jacobs's office. This is Paula Nunez, I said, keeping my tone neutral. I received an email. I was put through immediately. Ah, Ms. Nunez, thank you for calling back, the voice said. It was slick, confident, the kind of voice that was used to getting its way. My name is Arthur Jacobs. I represent your parents, Robert and Catherine Nunez. We have a financial matter that requires your cooperation. Cooperation? The word hung in the air, dripping with condescension. He expected me to fold, to be the dutiful daughter they had discarded. I didn't answer. I leaned back in my chair and employed a basic interrogation technique I'd learned at Fort Bragg. Tactical silence. Let the other side grow uncomfortable. Let them fill the void. An empty space in a conversation is a vacuum, and people, especially those who are nervous or hiding something, feel an overwhelming need to fill it with information. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10. I could hear the faint sound of him clearing his throat. Ms. Nunez, are you there? He asked, a crack in his professional veneer. I remained quiet. Look, he began, his voice losing its polished edge and taking on a hint of desperation. This is regarding an irrevocable trust set up by your late grandfather, a rather significant one. He stammered slightly. As the firstborn grandchild, you are listed as an irreplaceable beneficiary. We simply need your signature on some documents to proceed. Irrevocable trust, irreplaceable beneficiary. The words landed like a perfectly executed strike, and for the first time in weeks, a slow, cold smile spread across my face. It wasn't a smile of happiness, it was a smile of pure, unadulterated leverage. The entire battlefield had just been redrawn. I wasn't the lone soldier, abandoned and cut off from supplies. I was the one holding the high ground. I was the one in command of the choke point. When I finally spoke, my voice was devoid of all emotion. It was the flat, clear tone I used when speaking over a military radio, a voice that conveyed authority and left no room for negotiation. That's strange, Mr. Jacobs, I said calmly. According to my last intelligence report, my operational status was updated to stranger. It appears there's been a change in the situation on the ground. Please update me on this new mission. The silence on his end was now one of pure shock. He was completely wrong-footed. He had expected a hurt, angry daughter, not a commanding officer demanding a sitrep. He coughed, a dry, nervous sound. Well, as I said, it's a formality. Your signature is required to release certain assets tied to the trust. There's a major business deal your father is finalizing, and without these assets, the deal collapses. My mind raced, processing the intel. He wasn't just giving me information, he was handing me their entire strategy and, more importantly, their critical vulnerability. The family empire, the source of all their power and prestige, was contingent on the signature of the stranger they had thrown out into the cold. I listened as he continued to babble, explaining the dire consequences, the financial ruin that would follow if I didn't cooperate. I let him talk, gathering every piece of intel he unwittingly offered. He was bleeding information, and I was collecting every drop. When he finally ran out of words, his plea hanging in the air, I prepared my counter-offensive. It wouldn't be a negotiation. It would be a direct order. Mr. Jacobs, I said, my voice cutting through his panic like a knife, relay the following message to your clients. I paused for effect. Strangers do not participate in other people's campaigns. Over and out. I ended the call. I didn't slam the phone down. I placed it gently on the table, the plastic cool against my fingertips. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of loneliness or despair. It was the quiet, humming silence of a command center after the orders have been given and the pieces are in motion. The war had begun the day they slammed the door in my face. But the battle? The battle had just started. And this time, I was the one in command. The moment I hung up on Mr. Jacobs, the siege began. But this time, I wasn't the one under attack. They were. My phone, which had been silent for weeks, suddenly came to life. It didn't just buzz, it convulsed. A call from my father. I watched the screen, letting it ring until it went to voicemail. 30 seconds later, a call from my mother. I ignored it. Then a text from Daniel. Mom is freaking out, call her. I swiped the notification away. Another call, this time from a blocked number. I knew it was Jacobs. I silenced my phone, but left the screen on. This was the new mission parameter: radio silence. For 27 years, I'd been conditioned to respond instantly to their every summons. My availability was something they took for granted, a resource they could tap into at will. Now, I was cutting off that supply line. My silence wasn't passive, it was an active weapon. It created a power vacuum, a void of information that I knew was driving them into a state of panic. Every missed call, every frantic voicemail I didn't listen to, was a confirmation ping from the battlefield. My strategy was working. They were disoriented, and they were desperate. But I knew this was just the opening salvo. A lone soldier, no matter how well trained, is vulnerable. I needed a tactical advisor, someone who understood the rules of this new kind of engagement. I scrolled through my contacts, past the names of people from a life that no longer felt real, until I found him. Captain Marcus Thorne. We'd been in the same company at West Point. He was whip-smart, no-nonsense, and now a lawyer in the Army's JAG Corps. He answered on the first ring. Nunez, to what do I owe the honor? There was no small talk. I laid out the situation with the brevity of a field report. Marcus, I have a situation. Family matter, civilian side. I've been disavowed, then re-engaged due to a previously unknown strategic asset, an irrevocable trust. The opposing force is attempting to compel my cooperation under duress to salvage a financial operation. I've initiated radio silence, and they are escalating. There was a pause, then a low whistle on the other end of the line. Jesus, Paula, this isn't a family squabble, it's a full-blown offensive, and you're holding the high ground. His voice was exactly what I needed to hear, calm, strategic, and validating. Listen to me, do not move, do not speak. You hold your position until they transmit an unconditional offer of surrender. They drew first blood, now they have to play by your rules. His words solidified my resolve. I wasn't being cruel, I was being tactical. I thanked him and hung up. a new sense of clarity settling over me. That night, sleep wouldn't come. My mind was a churn of strategy and old wounds. I found myself scrolling aimlessly through YouTube, my thumb pausing on a thumbnail of a woman with a warm, intelligent face. The title was A TED Talk by Brené Brown. I'd heard her name before but had never paid much attention. I pressed play. I listened as she spoke about courage and vulnerability. But then she said the words that hit me like a sniper's bullet, precise and life-altering. Clear is kind, unclear is unkind. Clear is kind. The phrase echoed in the empty room. For my entire life, my family had operated in the murky gray of the unclear. Their love was conditional. Their expectations were unspoken but demanding. Their rules changed to suit their needs. And I had been the one to absorb all that ambiguity, constantly contorting myself to fit, to please, to keep the peace. My boundaries weren't just crossed, they never existed in the first place. And in that moment, I understood. What I was doing now, the silence, the refusal to engage, it wasn't about revenge. It was the kindest thing I could possibly do for myself. For the first time in my 27 years, I was drawing a line in the sand. I was creating a boundary so clear, so absolute, that it could not be misinterpreted. I was finally being kind to myself. The final assault from their side came 2 days later. It was a text message from my mother. It was long and rambling, a masterclass in passive-aggressive manipulation. It started with feigned concern. "Paola, darling, I am so worried about you. We all are." Moved to guilt. "After everything we've done for you, this silence is just so hurtful." And then, as always, ended with a command disguised as an invitation. "We need to talk. I expect you at the house tomorrow night, 7 p.m. sharp." I read the message and for the first time, felt nothing. No pain, no anger, not even a flicker of the old obligation. All I felt was a profound sense of exhaustion with their tired, predictable tactics. They were running the same play they'd been running my whole life, and they couldn't understand why it wasn't working anymore. I sat for a moment, thinking. Then I began to type. My reply was short, concise, and stripped of all emotion. It was a military directive. Negative. Stranger's schedule does not permit all future communications to be routed through official channels. Await contact from my legal counsel. Over and out. I hit send. The moment the message delivered, I felt a seismic shift inside me. I had just established a psychological no-fly zone. My airspace was now restricted. Any unauthorized attempts to enter, whether through guilt, manipulation, or false sentiment, would be met with force. They had wanted a stranger. They had gotten one. And this stranger was no longer taking orders. My no-fly zone strategy worked too well. Unable to penetrate my defenses through private channels, my family resorted to a tactic as old as warfare itself: the ambush. The invitation didn't come from them. It arrived via official channels, an email from my commanding officer's office. It was a cordial invitation to attend the annual Concord Philanthropic Society Gala. A quick search confirmed my suspicions. Nunez Enterprises was the primary sponsor. My father had pulled strings, leveraging a contact high up in the command chain to issue what amounted to a lawful order disguised as a social request. To refuse would be a mark against my service record, an act of disrespect not just to my family, but to the uniform. It was a brilliant, vicious trap. I was cornered. Fine. If they wanted a confrontation on their chosen ground, I would not meet them as their daughter. I would meet them as their soldier. The night of the gala, I didn't reach for a cocktail dress. I opened my garment bag and pulled out my Army service uniform, the dress blues. The dark blue jacket, the perfectly creased trousers, the polished brass buttons, the ribbons on my chest that spoke of places they'd never been and sacrifices they'd never understand. This wasn't a costume. This was my skin. This was my truth. When I walked into the ballroom of the country club, a hush fell over the room. Heads turned. The sea of black ties and sequined gowns parted as I moved through it. The clinking of champagne flutes and the low hum of polite conversation died down to a murmur of whispers. I saw my father across the room, his face a mask of tight-lipped fury. I had defied his expectations. He wanted his wayward daughter to show up, ashamed. He got First Lieutenant Paula Nunez instead. And then I saw her. My mother, Catherine, gliding towards me, a predatory grace in her movements. Her smile was a work of art, a perfect, dazzling display of warmth that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. She stopped in front of me, placing a hand on my arm, her manicured nails a stark white against my blue sleeve. She raised her voice just enough for the surrounding circle of Concord's elite to hear. "Oh, Paula, darling, you came. Everyone, look, my daughter. She always did love playing dress-up, playing the little soldat." She laughed, a light, tinkling sound that was meant to be charming but felt like shattering glass. "Isn't she just adorable?" The word, soldat, hung in the air. It was a dismissive, condescending jab meant to infantilize me, to reduce my service, my entire identity, to a child's game. The guests around us offered polite, uncertain smiles. My mother then leaned in, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper meant only for me. "Who in the hell do you think you are, ignoring us?" she hissed, her smile never wavering. "You're nothing but an ungrateful little girl. You would be nothing without the Nunez name." And that was it. The final straw. The single comment that ignited every ounce of pain, every silent sacrifice, every moment of feeling invisible and unvalued. It wasn't just an insult to me. It was an insult to the uniform I was wearing. It was an insult to every man and woman I'd ever served with. All the rage, all the grief I had been holding back erupted inside me. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. A terrifying calm washed over me, a chilling clarity that sharpened my senses. The background noise of the party faded to a dull roar. The only thing I could see was my mother's face. The only thing I could feel was the rigid fabric of my uniform, a suit of armor I had earned. I looked directly into her eyes. My voice, when it came out, wasn't loud, but it was as cold and hard as steel, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd around us. "You're mistaken," I said, addressing her not as mom, but as a stranger, as an adversary. "This uniform, it represents honor and loyalty, concepts you will never understand." A flicker of shock registered in her eyes. I pressed the attack. "And the Nunez name?" I continued, my voice steady and clear. "It's not my asset anymore. It's my burden. As of this moment, the campaign of silence is over." I took a small step back, creating a definitive space between us. I looked at her, and then my eyes swept over the shocked faces of the people watching this drama unfold. I was giving them the real story they craved. "You wanted a war?" I said, my voice resonating with the conviction of a soldier on the front lines. "You've got one. If you've ever had a moment where you finally found the courage to speak your truth after being silenced, support this story with a like. And to tell me in the comments, what is the one word you would use to describe that feeling of liberation? For me, that one word was finally. I didn't wait for her response. I turned on my heel, my back straight, my shoulders squared. I executed a perfect about face and walked. I didn't run. I walked with the measured, deliberate pace of a soldier leaving a conquered territory. The whispers erupted behind me, a wave of shock and speculation. I could feel my mother's stunned silence at my back, a more satisfying victory than any shouted argument could ever be. As I walked out of that ballroom and into the cool night air, I was no longer First Lieutenant Nunez, the daughter of Robert and Catherine Nunez. I was just Paula, a warrior, unbound. And I was finally free. The adrenaline from the confrontation at the gala carried me through the night. But when the sun came up, I knew the declaration of war was the easy part. Now, I had to prepare to win it. An emotional outburst gives you a moment of release, but a well-planned strategy gives you lasting victory. The first light of dawn was filtering through my window when I called Captain Marcus Thorne again. "The situation has escalated," I said, my voice calm and measured. "I've made a public declaration. The campaign is now entering an offensive phase. I need civilian counsel. The best, someone who won't be intimidated by the Nunez name or their army of lawyers." Marcus didn't waste time with questions. He understood the shift in protocol. "I know someone," he said instantly. "She's a Marine veteran. Name is Jessica Riley. She's not just a lawyer, Paula. She's a fighter. He sent me her contact information. An hour later, I had an appointment for that afternoon. Jessica Riley's office wasn't the plush, mahogany-paneled suite I expected from a high-powered attorney. It was sparse, practical, and efficient. A framed flag of the United States Marine Corps hung on the wall behind her desk, the only decoration. Jessica herself was the same, sharp, direct, with intelligent eyes that seemed to assess everything at once. She didn't offer sympathy or platitudes. She offered a legal pad and a pen. "Give me the brief, Lieutenant." For the next hour, I laid out the entire history, not as a wounded daughter, but as an intelligence officer detailing years of systemic, emotional, and financial exploitation. I covered the denied scholarship, the confiscated truck, the empty promises, and the final expulsion, culminating in the legal leverage of my grandfather's trust. Jessica listened without a single interruption, her expression unreadable. She just nodded occasionally, taking notes. When I finished, the room was silent for a long moment. She leaned forward, placing her hands flat on the desk, and looked me straight in the eye. "Welcome to the fight, Lieutenant," she said, a grim smile touching her lips. "Let's be clear. This isn't a family lawsuit. This is a liberation campaign, and I will be your commanding officer in this theater." For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt a profound sense of relief. I wasn't alone anymore. I had found an ally who spoke my language, who saw the battlefield for what it was. I had a CO. "Our first objective," Jessica continued, her tone all business, "is to gather our ammunition. I want you to go back through your entire life, every email, every text message, every report card, every bank statement. I want you to excavate your past, not with pain, but like an archaeologist. We are looking for evidence, for artifacts that prove a pattern of behavior." That night, I turned my small studio apartment into a war room. I spent hours online, digging through old email accounts, cloud storage, and social media archives. What had once been the sources of pain were now transformed into tactical assets. The email chain from my high school guidance counselor, regretfully withdrawing my acceptance of the West Coast scholarship. Ammunition. The saved text messages from my mother, asking me to come home from college on weekends to watch Daniel instead of studying for my finals. Ammunition. The bank statements showing the $3,000 withdrawal from my summer job savings, followed by the car registration transferred to Daniel's name a week later. Ammunition. Each piece of evidence was another round in my magazine. But the most powerful weapon in my arsenal was the one my grandfather had left me. Jessica had obtained a full copy of the irrevocable trust. There, on the last page, was a handwritten addendum in my grandfather's familiar, strong script. It read, "For my Paula, my warrior, so that she may always be free to fly. My warrior." He had seen me. Long before West Point, long before I even saw it in myself, he had known who I was. His words were a posthumous blessing, a validation that cut through all the years of my parents' dismissals. He hadn't just left me money, he had left me a mission statement. Tucked inside the folder with the trust documents was an old, worn Bible. It had been my grandfather's. As I flipped through the pages, a passage underlined in faded pen caught my eye. It was from the Gospel of John, chapter 8, verse 32. "And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." The verse settled deep in my soul. I wasn't a particularly religious person, but those words resonated with a powerful clarity. I realized my ultimate objective wasn't money. It wasn't about destroying my family or seeking revenge. My mission was simpler and far more profound. It was about the truth of my sacrifices, the truth of their selfishness, the truth that had been buried for 27 years under a mountain of lies and manipulations. I wasn't fighting to punish them. I was fighting to liberate myself from the role of the silent victim they had assigned me. The truth will set you free. It was no longer just a legal case. It was my articles of faith. It was the guiding principle for every action I would take from that moment forward. The war wasn't about winning. It was about bringing everything into the light. The mandatory mediation took place in a sterile, soulless conference room in a downtown Boston high-rise. The air was thick with tension, the only sound the quiet hum of the HVAC system. A long, polished mahogany table separated the two sides like a demilitarized zone. On one side sat my family. My father, Robert, looking imperious in his tailored suit. My mother, Catherine, radiating icy disdain. And my brother, Daniel, staring intently at his phone, already bored. Their lawyer, Mr. Jacobs, shuffled papers with an air of forced confidence. On the other side, there was just me and Jessica Riley. I sat straight-backed, my hands resting calmly on the table. I felt no fear, no anger, just a profound sense of focus. This was the final objective. This was the moment the truth would be brought into the light. My father, accustomed to being in charge, opened the proceedings. He didn't address the mediator. He addressed me, his voice dripping with patriarchal authority. All right, let's get this over with quickly. Paula, just tell us what you want. How much will it take to get you to sign the papers? He saw this as a simple transaction, a business negotiation to manage a troublesome asset. He hadn't yet realized that he was not in a boardroom. He was on a battlefield, and he was about to be flanked. Jessica Riley offered a small, disarming smile that didn't reach her eyes. She addressed my father, but her voice was clear and carried to every corner of the room. Mr. Nunez, with all due respect, we are not here to discuss a payout. We are here to discuss the years of calculated emotional and financial exploitation my client has endured at the hands of her family. A flicker of annoyance crossed my father's face. Mr. Jacobs shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Jessica opened a binder in front of her. Her voice remained calm, almost conversational, which made the words she spoke even more devastating. Let's begin with the spring of 2014, she said, her eyes fixed on my parents. Exhibit A. A letter from a university in California offering my client a full athletic scholarship, and the subsequent email from Ms. Nunez to that university declining the offer. An email, I might add, that was sent less than 24 hours after your own travel itinerary for a 6-week business trip to Europe was finalized. A trip for which you needed a reliable babysitter for your then-teenage son. My mother's perfectly composed face tightened. Daniel finally looked up from his phone. Let's move on. Jessica continued, flipping a page. Exhibit B. Bank statements from the summer of 2015, showing a series of deposits from my client's job at a local diner, followed by a single withdrawal of $3,000. And here is a copy of the vehicle title for a Ford Ranger pickup truck, purchased by my client, dated the following week. And here's the title transfer, dated on your son Daniel's 16th birthday, signing the vehicle over to him. A temporary loan, I believe the text from you, Mrs. Nunez, described it as. A temporary loan that lasted until the truck was traded in a year later. This is ridiculous, my father boomed, his face turning red. These are private family matters. They became my client's private financial burdens, Jessica countered smoothly. Which brings us to Exhibit C, the promise of a senior position at Nunez Enterprises upon my client's graduation from West Point. A promise made to induce her to join the military, an institution you initially opposed until you realized its value for your social standing, and a promise that was never fulfilled. Instead of a job, she was given a slam door and the new title of stranger. My father was about to erupt, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. This is nothing but a collection of petty childhood grievances, he spat. You have nothing. Jessica held his gaze. On the contrary, Mr. Nunez, she said, her voice dropping slightly, drawing all the focus in the room. We have everything. She slid a single piece of paper to the center of the table. This is the handwritten addendum from your own father's irrevocable trust. She let the silence hang for a moment before she read the words aloud, her voice clear and resonant. For my Paula, my warrior, so that she may always be free to fly. She then lifted her eyes from the page and pinned my father with a piercing stare. My question for you, Mr. Nunez, is this. Do you believe that systematically clipping your daughter's wings by forcing her to give up her dreams, confiscating her hard-earned property, and then finally throwing her out of her home, aligns with your father's stated desire for her to be free to fly? That was the kill shot. The color drained from my father's face. For the first time in my life, I saw his mask of arrogant confidence completely shatter. He looked small. My mother started to protest, a string of incoherent noises falling from her lips, but her voice was trembling, stripped of all its venom. Mr. Jacobs just stared at the document as if it were a live grenade. And Daniel sank low in his chair, his head bowed, staring at the polished surface of the table as if it held the answers to the universe. He was finally, deeply, and publicly ashamed. I remained silent through it all. I watched the empire of their self-delusion crumble under the weight of simple, undeniable facts. I didn't feel a surge of vicious triumph. I didn't feel the need to say, "I told you so." What I felt was release, a profound, quiet sense of vindication. The truth was finally in the room, spoken not by me in a fit of anger, but laid bare by the cold, hard evidence of their own actions. The battle was over. I had won. Winning a war is a loud, chaotic affair. The aftermath is quiet, deceptively so. After the explosive climax of the mediation, after the definitive, undeniable victory, there was no triumphant parade. There was only a profound, echoing silence that filled every corner of my small studio apartment. The battle was over. The enemy was defeated and had retreated in disarray. But I was left standing alone on the battlefield, looking at the wreckage and grappling with a question no training exercise ever prepares you for. What now? A few days later, a thick cream-colored envelope arrived, wedged into my small metal mailbox. It had no return address, but I recognized the elegant, forceful slant of the handwriting immediately. It was from my father. Inside, on heavy, expensive stationery bearing the Nunez family crest, was a handwritten letter, the first he'd ever written to me. For my entire life, his communication had been verbal commands, critical report card reviews, or the impersonal finality of a signed check. This was different. He didn't order or manipulate, he attempted to explain. He wrote of a regret that felt both hollow and desperate. He wrote of his own cowardice, painting himself as a man trapped by my mother's obsession with maintaining a flawless public image, an image I'd apparently disrupted by simply existing as I was. He wrote that he was sorry, the words looking alien and clumsy in his powerful script. The letter ended with a plea for me to come home, closing with a line that was meant to be a lifeline, but felt like a chain. "Our family needs you, Paula." I read the letter twice, then a third time, searching for a reaction within myself. I waited to feel something. A surge of the old, familiar anger. Perhaps a flicker of pity for the man he was revealing himself to be. Or maybe even a glimmer of that childhood longing to finally be wanted. I felt nothing. It was like reading a casualty report from a war that had ended long ago, a conflict whose outcome was already decided. The words were just ink on paper. The apology, if that's what it was, had arrived long after the wound had closed. It had scarred over, and the new skin that formed was tougher, thicker, and could no longer feel his touch. The letter, however, did force me to confront the next, and perhaps final, objective in this campaign: forgiveness. As a soldier, I understood the principle of moving forward. You don't dwell on the last firefight when you're preparing for the next mission. But how do you move on from a lifetime of friendly fire? The word forgiveness felt like a trap, a Trojan horse that, once accepted, would open the gates to the same toxic patterns, the same invasions of my peace. One sleepless night, my mind churning, I found myself reading an article online. It was about W. Mitchell, the inspirational speaker who had survived 2 horrific accidents, one that burned over 65% of his body, another that left him paralyzed from the waist down. The article quoted his famous motto, a phrase that seemed to cut through all my internal noise. "It's not what happens to you, it's what you do about it." The profound simplicity of that idea struck me with the force of a revelation. My entire focus had been on what they had done to me. But the power wasn't in analyzing the injury, it was in deciding my response. And in that moment, I understood what forgiveness had to be for me. It wasn't about absolving them of their actions. It wasn't about erasing the past or pretending the scars weren't there. It certainly wasn't about reopening the door for them to hurt me again. Forgiveness, I decided, was an internal declaration of peace. It was a unilateral ceasefire declared for my own benefit. It was the conscious decision to release myself from the corrosive burden of their bitterness and my own resentment. I would not let their actions dictate the geography of my future. I was going to do something about it. I was going to choose my own peace. The next morning, I called Jessica Riley. My voice was steady, my objective clear. "I'm ready to present the final terms of my surrender," I told her. "Your surrender?" she asked, a note of confusion in her voice. "Their surrender," I corrected myself. "My terms." My proposal was simple and absolute. I would sign the necessary documents to release the funds from my grandfather's trust, allowing them to salvage their company and avoid complete financial ruin. I wouldn't let them go bankrupt. I would leave them with the gilded cage they had built for themselves. I wouldn't take a single dollar for myself from that transaction. In return, they would agree to a legally binding, permanent no-contact order, enforced by the court. "Are you absolutely sure about this, Paula?" Jessica asked, her voice careful. "You're entitled to a significant settlement. We could make them pay, literally, for years to come." "I'm sure," I said, my voice firm. This was never about the money. It was about the principle. I don't want their money. I want my life. This wasn't an act of kindness. It was an act of finality. A surgical extraction of their influence from my life. I was severing the last tie that bound us together, both emotionally and financially. It was my honorable discharge from the Nunez family. Before the papers were finalized, Daniel found me. He sent a text, a simple, "Can we talk?" And I agreed to meet him at a small, neutral coffee shop near my apartment. He looked haggard, the arrogant confidence he always wore completely gone, replaced by a confused vulnerability. He sat across from me, stirring a coffee he wasn't drinking. "I don't get it, Paula," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Why are you doing this? Why not just take the money and ruin them, after everything they did?" I looked at my brother, and for the very first time, I didn't see the golden child, the rival, the reason for so much of my pain. I just saw a weak man, trapped in the very system that had always protected him, unable to imagine a world where value wasn't measured in dollars and cents. I felt a strange, sad pity for him. "Because it was never about the money, Daniel," I said softly. "It was about freedom. My freedom." I stood up from the table, leaving my own coffee untouched. I pulled a $10 bill from my pocket and laid it on the table to cover both our drinks. It felt like the last debt being paid. "I hope one day," I said, looking down at him one last time, "you find a way to get free too." I walked out of the coffee shop into the bright afternoon sun and didn't look back. I left him there, surrounded by the wreckage of a family he had benefited from but never truly understood. I had signed my own Declaration of Independence. The war was over. I was free. 1 year later. Freedom, I learned, is not a destination you arrive at. It's a place you build, piece by piece. After the legal battle was over, I could have gone back. Back to my military career, back to the structured world I knew so well. But the war I had just won had taught me that my most important mission was no longer on a foreign battlefield. It was here. It was the mission of building a life of my own design. So, I filed for an honorable discharge, and with the funds from my grandfather's trust, the money he had left for me, his warrior, I did something I'd never allowed myself to dream of. I bought a small, quiet farm nestled in the rolling green hills of Vermont. It wasn't a grand estate like the one I grew up in. It was a simple, rustic log-style house with a wide front porch, a sturdy red barn, and acres of open fields bordered by old stone walls. This was my true home front. This was the rear echelon I'd built with my own hands, a sanctuary that no one could ever expel me from. I also acquired a new battle buddy, a fiercely loyal German shepherd with intelligent brown eyes. I named him Ranger. He became my constant companion, the silent keeper of my newfound peace. The money from my grandfather was more than enough for the farm. It was a substantial sum, a legacy I knew I had to honor. I thought about what he wrote, so that she may always be free to fly. I realized that true freedom isn't just about breaking your own chains. It's about helping others break theirs. His legacy wasn't meant to end with me. It was meant to be a beginning. With the majority of the remaining funds, I established a nonprofit foundation. I called it The Warrior's Haven. The mission was simple and clear: to provide outdoor skills training and trauma-informed therapy retreats for young female veterans struggling with the transition back to civilian life. It was for the women like me, the ones who had served with honor, only to come home and find themselves feeling like strangers in the very world they had fought to protect. I wanted to build the safe harbor that I never had. The farm became our base camp. The fields and forests became our training grounds and our sanctuary. That's where you'd find me now. Not in an office, but under a canopy of pine trees, the air smelling of wood smoke and damp earth. A few weeks ago, I was leading a group of 6 young women, all in their early 20s, all carrying the invisible wounds of their service. We were learning how to build a fire in wet conditions. I wasn't their lieutenant anymore. I wasn't issuing orders. I was their teammate, their sister in arms. I showed them the technique, but more importantly, I listened. As we worked, huddled around the struggling flames, their stories began to emerge. Stories of feeling disconnected from their families who couldn't understand what they'd been through. Stories of feeling adrift in a civilian world that felt trivial and loud. Stories of feeling profoundly, crushingly alone. I didn't share the details of my own family war, but I shared the feelings. I spoke of the loneliness, of the struggle to find a new identity when the old one is stripped away, of the quiet battle to build a new sense of home. As the fire finally caught, its warmth pushing back the evening chill, a young former medic looked at me, her face illuminated by the flickering light. "You know," she said, her voice soft but steady, "being here. This is the first time since I came home that I don't feel like a freak. I feel like I'm not alone." Her words were the greatest commendation I had ever received. I smiled at her, a real, genuine smile that came from a place of deep contentment. These women, this place, this mission. This was my new unit. This was my chosen family. The story ends here, but my life is just beginning. Every morning, I wake before the sun. I sit on my front porch in an old wooden rocking chair, a steaming mug of black coffee in my hands, Ranger resting his head on my feet. I watch the sky slowly shift from inky black to deep purple, then to a brilliant, hopeful orange as the sun crests over the green mountains. There are no more nightmares of faraway deserts or ambushes in sterile conference rooms. The ghosts of the Nunez family no longer haunt my quiet moments. There's only the gentle morning breeze, the sound of birdsong, and a profound, unshakable sense of peace. I am not Catherine's daughter. I am not Robert's asset. I am not even Lieutenant Nunez anymore. I am simply Paula, a survivor, a healer, a woman who fought the most important war of her life, not for a country or a flag, but for herself. And now, every single day, I get to watch the sun rise on a dawn of my own making. Thank you for following my journey from that cold night on my parents' lawn to this peaceful morning on my own porch. It's a reminder that even after the longest night, we have the power to create our own dawn. My Warrior's Haven taught me that the most important unit is the one you build yourself, based on trust and respect. If my story moved you, please show your support by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And in the comments below, I'd love to read about your haven. Tell me about one person who is part of your chosen family.